Hey everybody. Hope y'all are doing well. This is going to be our class session for January 15th. I do have oh, you can't really see it. There you go. A Grinch mug still from the holidays. So, bear with me as you see me sipping on this Grinch mug. I get it. We're in the new year, but it's just too good. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen and we will get into it. All right. All right. So you can see that. Perfect. Just wanted to start by saying again, get SPSS set up on your computer. So reach out to Concordia's IT department. Let me know of any help that you need with this, but we need this to be set up for our quantitative unit, which is the first half of our semester. So make sure you get SPSS set up, downloaded, working on your computer, and then we will go from there. Uh, okay, so just a quick, I wanted to just throw out some questions of the day, uh, a question of the day to y'all, just to get you kind of thinking about like what does sociology mean to you? How does it connect to your studies? So we may think about this more because I want you to just have a through line through the semester, and then when we meet on Fridays, actually together and in real time when we meet, I will ask you a question of the day. And this might be one of them, just because what does sociology mean to you? Maybe you're thinking about sociology for the first time in this course. Maybe you're trying to figure out how does it connect to your studies. Let's be thinking about those things. Now let's get into today though, because we're going to talk about some of the things that we mentioned just in the prior class period, but also conceptualization and measurement. We're going to talk about all these things. So let's talk about the scientific method to start though, right? So the scientific method, maybe you've heard that before, right? What is actually the scientific method? So just putting it simply, the scientific method is it's the way scientists it's the way empirical researchers go about answering questions in a way that has reliable data, data that we can be actionable on. And it's really a systematic research method that involves asking a question, researching existing sources, forming a hypothesis, designing and conducting a study, and drawing conclusions from those results. And it all is based upon sound research design. Because with sound research design, we can have sound data and actionable data. But without sound research design, all the things we'll talk about in this class, then we do not have a sound data through this method that we can actually be actionable on. So, and remember, what do we mean by the sociological imagination? I asked you all that in the previous day, right? In our first session. And this, remember, the sociological perspective is about being broader, about thinking about your personal lived experience or another individual's lived experience, connecting that to a broader historical context or social context or a broader social issue and all the different factors that contribute to what actually makes our lived experience as individuals, that is connected to broader institutional factors. All right, so just be thinking about that too. Again, connecting personal challenges to larger social issues. And you can do that at you personally or in other people and folks you read about, things you read about in the news, on social media. Think about how the sociological imagination can impact those things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the positivist versus interpretive approaches to research. So, as you can see on the screen there, so your positive approach emphasizes a natural science model of knowledge. So, employing a hypothetico-deductive research method and a quantitative data largely. So, really, it's assuming that society shapes the individual in society. So, with an objective stance, more minimizing that impact of maybe a researcher's subjectivity or social context, looking at how society shapes the individual. Interpretive, focusing on gaining an in-depth understanding of topics through observation, interaction, and more qualitative methods, and assuming that individuals also shape society, that the individual shapes society around us. Emphasizing the subjective meanings, the social interactions in the research process. These are the different types of just a generalized way of thinking in sociology and research methods. So while the positivist model dismisses factors like social interaction, and influence among researchers, the idiosyncrasies of the individual researchers themselves. So you as the researcher and the researcher's subjective interpretations as being irrelevant in the research process, that's flipped on its head in the interpretive perspective. So that's emphasizing the importance of such factors of understanding how the scientific knowledge actually develops. So positivist, it's like, well, here's the data. We understand the data, just how it is. Interpretive is taking a more in-depth understanding of the nuances of even you playing a role as a researcher in the research process. That there's a subjective component there, that you are playing an active role, whatever that might be, in the research itself, and taking into the context of that point of view. So on this slide here, positivist versus interpretive approach, you kind of see just a basic layout of some of the differences that would be in these kind of lines of thought. So kind of the things that I just already mentioned, but wanted to include this here just so you could all have it. Could pause the recording and take a look here, but also you have the slides on the Moodle page too that you can then look at this chart. But I wanted to really highlight the role of researcher at the bottom here. Because the role of researcher is kind of the important, maybe more defining feature here. So positivist approach, you're more of a detached observer, whereas an interpretive approach, you're more of an engaged participant in that process, okay, as a researcher. It just, again, another summary too, because sometimes this can be a little confusing. So while positivism seeks objective, universal truth through more strict methods, interpretivism recognizes the subjective and socially constructed nature of scientific knowledge itself. So now, a little bit different, but let's talk about inductive versus deductive. Maybe you've heard some of this language before, and that's great. But I wanted to talk about what this means. So this is different. Instead of lines of thought in terms of the role of the researcher, here we're thinking of reasoning, how you reason with data, how you reason with observation as a part of the process. So inductive reasoning starts with starts with specific observations or data and moves towards more broad generalizations or theories. And it's really common in exploratory research where it helps us to develop new theories, whereas deductive reasoning begins with more general premises. So starts bigger or existing theories and tests them through specific observations, specific data. Really, it's in confirmatory research, so maybe testing existing theories, but you're starting broad and narrowing down, whereas inductive, you're starting specific and becoming more broad in your generalizations and theories. So inductive reasoning involves starting from specific premises and forming a more general conclusion, whereas deductive reasoning involves using really general premises to form more specific conclusions. So inductive, starting small, becoming bigger. Deductive, starting broader, becoming more specific. So inductive really using, again, like those specific observations and whatnot, whereas deductive starts with the theory more so. And really think about it in the sense of theory. So if you're developing a new theory on data, or if you're developing a brand new theory of type of thought or an idea, inductive, you're starting with the specifics and then making a theory out of those specifics. Whereas deductive, you're starting with the theory and getting into the specifics and testing that theory. Those are the differences there. So a couple maybe examples of how to think about it. Inductive, maybe I want to understand how artists operate in the social context of art distribution. So in the inductive approach, I'm going to aim to develop this new framework. I'm going to develop a new theory around how artists operate in social context. I'm going to name it, and I'm going to talk about, here's my theory for how this actually works. Deductive, I'm going to start with maybe the sociologist Howard Becker's theories of art worlds, and then test that framework in the research that I'm doing. So again, you're testing broader theories, and deductive, inductive, you're essentially creating those broader generalizations. Now, reliability and validity are also really, really important. We're going to talk about these throughout the entire semester. So I'm just giving you a brief and quick introduction here on reliability and validity, but this is how you can think about it. When we talk about these two terms, reliability means it refers to the consistency of your results, meaning that I could maybe conduct this research or conduct this experiment over and over again, and I would get fairly consistent results. You want a high level of consistency and reliability there. Validity, on the other hand, is looking at the actual accuracy of the measure itself. So really valid methods reflect that they're actually meaning that you're collecting what you're intending to collect. You're analyzing what you're intending to analyze. So some key concepts here is that in validity, it's really the degree to which you can measure accurately what you're trying to measure. So whereas reliability is more, again, that consistency. Like I could repeat this 10 times and get similar or the same results. Validity is, well, I need to have valid research methods. So that means that if I'm trying to analyze satisfaction level among students at Concordia College, I need to make sure that that's the data I'm actually gathering. I'm gathering it accurately. So if I were to say, for instance, maybe I'm assessing Concordia's dining services, and I have a research question to you all in this class, and the research question is, please rate your level of satisfaction around Concordia's dining services from a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the least satisfied and 5 being the most satisfied. Okay, that's an example, right? So I'm asking you rate your level of satisfaction on Concordia's dining services. But if my research question was, well, I want to know how satisfied people are with the pizza selection at Concordia's dining services, but I asked the same question, that's not a really valid question because I'm asking about your opinion across the board of dining services, right? And so, but I would need to get more specific on, let's specifically ask about the pizza selection, for instance. And you get there are these, and it gets really nuanced with this too, because especially if you get bigger and bigger and broader research topics, sometimes the specifics could get lost, and that's where you lose out on the validity of, am I actually measuring what I'm intending to measure? And usually, if you don't have good validity, you're not going to have good reliability either. So let's talk about validity. So face validity. Well, there's 4 different options right there, but face validity refers to, does the measure really appear to assess what it's supposed to? Content validity, does the measure cover all aspects of the concept being studied? So when we're referring to measure, by the way, we're referring to like that, the tool, right? If you're doing a survey or an interview and the way you're asking it. So face validity, again, does it appear to measure what it's supposed to? Content validity, does the measure actually cover all aspects of the concept being studied? Construct validity, does the measure accurately capture the theoretical construct? So if my theory is on art world, is my survey tool, is my interview guide, are those things actually capturing the foundations of that theory, of the thing I'm actually trying to test? And then criterion validity, can the measure predict or correlate with related outcomes? We'll maybe dive into a lot of these more and more, but we're really going to focus on those first 3. So face validity, does my tool appear to actually measure what I'm trying to actually assess? As well as the content, right? Does it measure all things that the content's meant to be studied? And then construct validity, does the measure accurately capture the things that in the theory that maybe we're trying to test? So some examples of validity in practice. So think of like surveys. If you've ever taken a survey, some key steps around survey validation that you want to make sure that you employ, which you will be doing in your survey questionnaire assignment. Establishing that face validity. So ensure that the questions align with your research goals. A pilot test. So run that initial study maybe to assess clarity and reliability. Do a pilot of your survey. Principal components analysis. So PCA analysis. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but identifying patterns and responses. So identifying are folks responding in similar ways across the board? Is there some pattern that's developing? Internal consistency as well is important. So checking for reliability across different survey items. Do you have any overlap between maybe the different survey questions you have? And then revising and then retesting, right? So making adjustments based on this feedback and this data. So when we implement a brand new survey, let's say I want to implement an organizational research tool that I want 1,000 organizations to use. I'm going to do these measures, right? Make sure that it's reliable and valid by testing and refining the survey in itself. And we'll talk actually about what the statistical validation process can actually look like, doing like factor analyses and things like that. And then triangulation is a concept we'll talk more about. But really what this means is we're trying to strengthen validity by using multiple approaches to a study. So maybe it's combining quantitative and qualitative data and measures and methods in a study. Maybe it's engaging multiple researchers for more diverse perspectives, collecting data from different contexts, times, and populations using the same tool. So all triangulation means is like think about it coming at it from multiple angles. So if I'm going to study this class, I could just do a survey or I could just do interviews, but triangulation could involve I'm going to do a survey. I'm also going to do follow-up interviews with you. I'm going to study you at this point in time, but also next year at maybe the beginning of the spring semester in 12 months from now. So these are what we mean by triangulation. These are things that help with validity. That might seem like a lot right now. We just went through, but we'll go over these concepts more and more as we actually go through the class. Research questions. So a research question you probably had one before, right? So a research question is a question that your research project seeks to answer, that you're setting out to actually answer. So maybe it's, for instance, I want to know about Gen Z views on religion. A research question, that would be the entire area, right? That'd be the topic, the problem area that I want to look at. The research question could be something like, are Gen Zers less religious than previous generations? And then based upon that research question, I can then develop the survey or the questionnaire or the interview guide that I'm going to use to go about answering that question. So choosing a research question is a really essential element of both qualitative and quantitative research. Whatever line of research you're going to do, you need some sort of research question. And so we'll do exercises on actually how to develop a good actionable research question. Hypotheses. So maybe you've heard the term hypotheses before as well. But you can think of hypotheses as an educated guess, predicting outcomes about the relationships between two or more variables, or predicting the outcome of your research question. So if my question was in the previous slide, my research question, are Gen Zers less religious than previous generations? My hypothesis could be, yes, they are less religious than previous generations, or no, they're actually the same, or no, they're more religious than previous generations, whatever that might be, something I can test based on the results. And so this methodology, really what's important is that we have some sort of hypothesis that we're testing, especially in things like experimental research. And so what do you think is going to happen? What are you going to predict that's going to happen based upon the research that you're doing? So again, thinking about that generational research model, are Gen Zers less religious? Yes, they are less religious, or no, they're not less religious would be the potential hypotheses there. I mentioned variables too, right? We're testing the relationship between variables. A variable is a characteristic or measure of a social phenomenon in sociological research that can take different values. So it's really the different components in your study that you're examining. And you see independent versus dependent variable there. So your independent variable is the thing that's going to cause changes in a dependent variable. Whereas the dependent variable is the variable being actually impacted or changed, the things that we're studying, the thing that's being impacted by your independent variable. So this is largely really important in experimental studies and statistical procedures. I'll get into this with things like cross-tabulations and correlational research. We're going to look at in experience testing, independent versus dependent variables here. So examples of variables could be the demographics of artists, right? Like for that research area I mentioned, like how are artists experiencing the economy in Colorado or something, right? So how are artists moving through art worlds and how has that changed since COVID? So maybe the demographics of artists, their identities could be independent variable. So do those experiences differ based upon if they're white or non-white artists, or if they're women versus men? Those are potential independent variables that could impact their dependent variables, maybe the number of the commissions they've received as artists, or the amount of individual commissions that they received, like the amount of money that they get for their art. So all these things could be the dependent variables that are impacted by things like demographics or the experience of the artist itself. Conceptualization. So we're going to talk about conceptualization, operationalization, and measurement here in the coming slides. So conceptualization is the process of defining an abstract concept for research purposes. What you need are these, we call them nominal definitions. So they're straightforward dictionary-like definitions that clarify terms. So if there's things like, if I'm starting artists And like I just mentioned the word commissions, right? What do I mean by a commission of an artist? Well, in a nominal definition, I would conceptualize, okay, here's what a commission is. This is the amount of money that an artist receives for a work that they produce. That's what a commission is. Why conceptualization matters, it provides clarity and focus for your research. It ensures consistency in how concepts are understood and measured. So if I did a survey on artists, but I didn't define all the terms that I was using, and there was a lack of clarity around, okay, what do I actually mean by this? It would be very hard to reproduce that study because I haven't been clear on what I mean by each of these areas. And so another example would be like defining social class. So some initial brains, right? So what comes to mind when you hear social class? I'm sure a lot of things, right? So social class can evoke ideas about income or education or your occupation, but there's really no single objective definition of what social class means. There's a lot that goes into it. So what you would do is you conduct likely a literature review. So explore how other researchers define that concept of social class, identify its potential dimensions like income, education, and someone's occupation. Make a decision and decide which dimensions are most relevant to your research, and then define them. And then actually, so consider the advantages and disadvantages of that, and then actually have a conceptual definition. For let's say I'm going to study social class here. I did the research. Here's what I'm defining in my study as social class. And you would actually define that. Maybe you're in your write-up, in your article. So maybe, for an example, social class is defined as the total amount of monetary income earned by an individual from all sources or all jobs that they have in a given 12-month period. That's what we could define as social class. Now, we left out education and occupation. We looked at just income. So we're leaving out some other components that other researchers might use, but our conceptualization here is we defined it as this for our study. And it's really important to do that because we need to have conceptualization, understanding our research objectives to be precise, avoid ambiguity, and then remember that our definitions guide operationalization, which is the next slide. So operationalization, that's making concepts measurable. Turning these more abstract concepts that we just defined into actual measurable operationalization. So it's really the what is measured, how these indicators are measured, and then the rules for actually assigning values of each of these things. So it really gets to the interpretation of measured values as well, because you need to make sure that you have defined these concepts, you understand how these things are measured, and then you're actually interpreting the measured values. And that's why it's important. That's why it's critical, because it ensures that concepts are measurable and testable. So providing consistency in how the data is collected and analyzed, linking those abstract ideas into actual observable data. For example, like the concept of like social anxiety is a more abstract concept, but an operational definition could be measured by self-rating scores or avoidance of crowded places or physical anxiety symptoms like increased heart rate. Those are the things we can actually operationalize and how we measure an abstract concept like social anxiety. Same with operating social class, right? You could ask, during the past 12 months, what was the total amount of income that you earned from all sources before taxes and other deductions? So you could look at that component as well. So that's what it means. So we conceptualized our concepts, and then we operationalize by actually how are we measuring those specific concepts. And then we get to actual measurement. So measurement is the process of observing and recording the observations that are collected as part of your research effort. So these are the key steps to measurement. So we covered the first two, right? So it's conceptualization. You're defining the key areas or concepts that you want to study, like what we mean by social inequality or job satisfaction, whatever that might be. Operationalize is actually deciding how we're going to measure those concepts in our research, in practice. And then measurement is actually applying your methods to collect the data. So if maybe my concept is I'm defining social class and I measure it by income, and then operationalization, I'm deciding, well, here's how I'm going to ask and figure out what person's income is, and I ask it in the survey question. Measurement is actually implementing that survey question in our research tool and collecting data. So you need all three in your methodology, and you need all three to be sound, to have sound methodology. So you need each. It's a step, right? A step-by-step process. Now, there are different levels to measurement. And this is really thinking about, a survey is a good way to think about these levels of measurement. Because as you construct survey, and as we get into more quantitative component of this class, we'll look at each of these. And these will be a part of your survey questionnaire assignment. So there's nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio levels of measurement. Let's start with nominal. So nominal, your nominal level of measurement really classifies data into really distinct categories that really don't have any intrinsic order. So the data at this level are typically more qualitative and cannot be arranged in really a meaningful way other than by category. So while they are more qualitative, you can quantify them on the back end with coding, which we'll talk about later. So characteristics here would be like labels or names identifying categories. The numbers assigned are like that coding piece are more arbitrary and serve only as identifiers. So think about gender categories: male, female, non-binary, transgender male, transgender female, marital status, single, married, divorced, widow, whatever it might be there. Types of pets. Do you have a dog, a cat, a bird, a fish? Like asking these as survey questions, there are no order of what is higher, lower, more important, less important. It's just classification in nominal level variables. So we're classified as male or female, or maybe it's racial categories as well, is an example of a nominal level variable. White, black, Asian, whatever it might be, those are nominal level variables. Here's examples of nominal level variables in, say, a survey. What is your gender? You see options male and female there. What is your hair color? And you have the different hair colors there. So it's all about classification. There is no logical order. There is no order classification or numerical classification. They are just categorical. Now, ordinal level variables. Ordinal data are also categorical, but they have a clear, meaningful order of ranking. But these ranks are not necessarily consistent or known. So the data can be arranged in order, but the intervals between the values are not equal or specified. So examples of ordinal level variables would be like if you have a high school or bachelor's degree or master's degree or doctorate, when they're asking about your education level, yes, there is they're categorical and they do have order and ranking though, right? So they have, high school is one level, doctorate's another, and there's in between. But there's no specific sort of difference in these ranks that are known in terms of there's not, a 1 to 2 or 2 to 4. There is not those specific differences. Same with like if you ever are asked about like customer satisfaction, like very unsatisfied or unsatisfied, neutral, satisfied, very satisfied, these what we call Likert scales. Yes, they're categorical and they have a range, but we don't know the actual like specifics. There's no numerical specifics between those ranges. So here's a couple examples here. That's a little blurry. Apologize for that. But how do you feel today? Ranking your happiness. Yes, it is ranked, but you don't see the actual numerical difference between those categories. Same with the satisfaction scale. This will probably make more sense what I'm saying at the end there when we look at interval level data, because you are going to see a numerical difference. So interval data are numeric scales with both the order and the exact differences between the values are actually meaningful. Now, the only difference here between interval and the next category is that interval data they don't have a true 0 point, which means they cannot say something is say twice as much as something else. So equal intervals between values, but no true 0. 0 does not indicate the absence of a 0 characteristic, but there is not a true 0 in these types of questions. So temperature is a good example. So the difference between 20 degrees Celsius and 30 degrees Celsius is the same difference as 30 degrees Celsius and 40 degrees Celsius, but 0 degrees Celsius does not mean no temperature. Does that make sense? So in interval level variables, there is no true nothing. There's no true 0. Now that's in Celsius and Fahrenheit. Now, if you took the Kelvin scale, for instance, if anyone's ever heard the Kelvin scale, absolute 0 is the lowest temperature imaginable, is the lowest temperature possible. So there is an absolute 0 point in Kelvin, but not in, say, Celsius or Fahrenheit. IQ scores. An IQ score of 130 is higher than 120, but does not mean it is twice as much as an IQ of 65 necessarily. Calendar years as well. There's no year 0 that signifies an absence of time, say, in calendar years. So here's an example of interval level data in temperature, right? So you have different degree points, but there isn't an absolute 0 like there are in other sort of measures. And those other sort of measures are ratio level variables. So ratio data are pretty much the exact same as interval data, but they have a meaningful 0 point. This means that not only can you say that one variable is greater than another, You can also say how many times greater that value is. So true zero exists, allowing for statements like twice as much or comparisons of magnitude. So examples, so like weight. There is an absolute zero in weight. Something can be weightless, right? 10 kilograms, 20 kilograms. 20 kilograms is twice as heavy as 10 kilograms. We know that because there's an absolute 0 point. We can make those statements. Height, 5 feet or 6 feet. 6 feet is 1.2 times as tall as 5 feet. These are where we can make those specific statements because there's an absolute 0 point. Same like age, 25 years, 50 years. 50 years being twice as old as 25 years. Income is another example of ratio level data. Because there's an absolute 0 point to income or age or height or weight. Those are really, really important. So some key summaries of differences here. So nominal, categories really with no order, race, gender, those sorts of things. Ordinal data, categories with a meaningful order, but unequal intervals. So education level. We don't know like a specific like numerical difference between the different categories there, but order does matter. Interval data, numeric data with equal intervals, but no true zero. Temperature in Celsius or Fahrenheit being an example. Ratio level is numeric data with equal interviews and a true zero, allowing for a more full comparison like income, weight, height, age. So think about ratio as the absolute 0 point, having that absolute zero. So each level of measurement provides specific types of data analysis that can be used. So it impacts different conclusions for us as researchers. And no one is better than the other. They all have their place. It's just important to understand that there are these differences, and these differences work to show what are the type of conclusions or assumptions that we can draw based upon the types of variables that we use. Here's just an example of a ratio level variable as well. See how likely there is an absolute 0 point in this ratio level variable. Another one too. So ratio scale versus interval scale. So interview, you see the temperature on the right. Let's see if I can draw this. Yeah, there we go. That should work. Tech. I'm really good at tech, everybody. So you see temperature here on the right, and then you see on the left an actual measurement in centimeters. So centimeters, they have a zero measurement in centimeters. See that absolute 0 point? There is not a 0 point here that's absolute in Celsius temperature or in Fahrenheit temperature, but there is in terms of more measurement of something like inches or centimeters. And that's how you can make those statements like, oh, well, it's twice as much as this, those sorts of things. All right. That's all we had for today. Just want to also tell everyone again that you all need to get SPSS signed up on your computer. Again, just make sure that you are able to do that. If you are having any issues with that, please let me know. And then we can figure it out with Concordia's IT department because you're going to have to use SPSS very soon. So make sure you get it downloaded on your computer, and that is on the Moodle page. And just like everything else, this recording and the notes from these slides will also be on the Moodle page. All right, everybody, please let me know of any questions you have. You can send me an email or whatever it might be. We will see you on our next class period session.